Nobody can stand you." Chloe's voice sliced through the music like glass shattering. Conversations died mid-sentence. Every eye in that glittering Savannah ballroom turned toward me, the overdressed guests, the polished smiles, even my own son, who said nothing. For a moment I felt it. The humiliation, the loneliness, the quiet confirmation of everything she had been whispering about me for years. Then something inside me stilled. I didn't cry. I didn't defend myself. Instead, I walked slowly, calmly toward the stage, reached for the microphone and smiled, because what I was about to say was something she never saw coming. If you've ever been humiliated by someone you trusted, I'd love to hear your story. Where are you watching from and what time is it there right now? Don't forget to like and subscribe if stories like this speak to you. And tell me, what would you have done in my place? My name is Skylar Bennett, and for most of my life, I believed that if you loved your family enough, everything else would fall into place. I used to teach music at a public high school just outside Savannah. 32 years of choir rehearsals, spring concerts, and teenagers who rolled their eyes at me in September but cried when they graduated in May. It wasn't a glamorous life, but it was a good one. Predictable, honest, full of small, quiet victories. My husband Thomas used to say I had a gift for making people feel seen. He was the steady one, an accountant with a calm voice and a way of solving problems without raising it. When he passed away 8 years ago, the world didn't just feel empty. It felt unfamiliar, like I had been dropped into someone else's life. Ryan was the only thing that still felt like home. Back then, we were close. Not in that overbearing, tangled way people sometimes criticize, but in a way built on mutual respect. After his father died, we leaned on each other. Sunday dinners became our ritual. I'd cook too much food and he'd complain about it while going back for seconds. We talked about everything: his job, his future, even his fears, though he'd pretend they were just stress. So when he told me he had met someone, I wanted to love her. The first time I met Chloe was at a little wine bar downtown. I remember how she stood up to greet me before I even reached the table. Her smile perfectly timed, her posture flawless. She was beautiful in that polished, magazine-ready way. Every detail of her, from her hair to her tone of voice, felt intentional. "Mrs. Bennett, I've heard so much about you," she said, reaching out both hands as if we were already close. I remember laughing softly. "Please call me Skylar." "Only if you call me Chloe," she replied. Her eyes bright. It was charming, disarming even, but there was something else too, something I couldn't quite name at the time. A feeling that I was being assessed. Throughout dinner, she asked questions, lots of them, about my career, my home, my routines. She complimented everything, but in a way that felt slightly too precise, like she was collecting details rather than simply enjoying conversation. When I mentioned I still lived in the house Thomas and I had bought decades ago, she tilted her head just slightly. "That must be a lot to maintain on your own," she said gently. "It keeps me busy," I replied with a smile. Ryan squeezed my shoulder. "Mom likes being independent." "Of course," Chloe said quickly, her smile returning. "That's admirable. Admirable." It should have felt like a compliment, but something about the way she said it made it sound like a temporary condition. Like independence was something she expected to fade. Still, I pushed the feeling aside. People have different ways of expressing themselves, I told myself. Not everyone is as straightforward as I am. And Ryan looked happy. That mattered more than anything. The early months after their engagement were filled with excitement. Wedding plans, venue tours, menu tastings. Chloe was in her element. Organized, decisive, effortlessly in control. I watched her coordinate vendors and schedules with the kind of precision I used to admire in my best students. At first, she included me. She would send me photos of dress options, ask for my opinion on flowers, even call me late in the evening just to run things by me. It felt like she was really trying to build a relationship, but slowly, almost imperceptibly, that began to change. It started with small things. Skylar, I think for the rehearsal dinner, we should keep things a bit more elevated, she said one afternoon, glancing at the restaurant I had suggested. It's lovely, but maybe not quite the atmosphere we're going for. I nodded. Of course. It's your day. Then it became comments about how I dressed. "Oh, that's such a sweet cardigan," she said once, her smile polite. "Very cozy, cozy." Another word that sounded kind on the surface, but carried something else underneath. At family gatherings, she began to gently correct me. "If you introduce Ryan like that, people might misunderstand his role at the bank," she whispered once, laughing lightly as if it were a joke. "I was just being proud," I said. "I know," she replied, patting my arm, "but image matters. Image." That word came up a lot with Chloe. Image of the family, image of success, image of stability. And somewhere in all of that, I began to feel like I didn't quite fit. I told myself it was generational, that younger people cared more about presentation, that I was simply from a different time. Ryan seemed to agree with her more often than not. "Mom, she just wants things to be smooth," he said once when I mentioned feeling a little out of place. "It's not personal, not personal." I held on to that phrase for longer than I should have, because if it wasn't personal, then it didn't hurt right. The wedding itself was beautiful, truly. A garden ceremony with soft white roses and string lights that made everything glow like something out of a magazine. Chloe looked radiant, Ryan looked proud, and I stood there, smiling, telling myself this was exactly what I had hoped for. A happy son, a growing family, a future that felt secure. I remember giving a small speech that night, nothing dramatic, just a few words about love, about patience, about choosing each other every day. People clapped, Chloe hugged me, Ryan kissed my cheek. For a moment, everything felt right, but looking back now, I realized that was the last time I felt fully included. After the wedding, things shifted more quickly. Holidays were no longer discussed. They were announced. "Thanksgiving will be at our place this year," Chloe said over the phone. "We've already invited a few people." "Oh," I replied, surprised. "I usually host, but we just think it's time to start our own traditions," she said smoothly. Our traditions. I understood that, of course. It's natural for new families to create their own rhythms, but I hadn't expected to be replaced so completely. Christmas became a scheduled visit, 2 hours, then 3 if it was convenient. Visits with my granddaughter, Emma, had to be arranged days in advance. She has a routine, Chloe would say. We're trying to keep things consistent. Another reasonable word that somehow made me feel unreasonable. At first I adapted. I told myself this was what stepping back looked like, that this was part of aging, gracefully giving space, not demanding attention. But space slowly turned into distance, and distance into silence. Then came the party. The one I stood in that night under those bright lights with strangers watching me, as if I were the problem. What no one in that room knew, what Chloe certainly didn't expect, was that I had not walked into that evening blindly. I had seen the changes. I had felt the shifts. And for the first time in my life, I had decided not to ignore them. If you had asked me even a year before that night whether my own family could make me feel like an outsider, I would have said no without hesitation. But the truth is, it didn't happen all at once. It happened quietly, gradually, so subtly that by the time I realized what was happening, I had already adjusted to it. That's how Chloe did things. She didn't push you out. She made you step back. Until one day you realized there was nowhere left to stand. The first time I noticed a real change was with Emma. She used to run into my arms the moment she saw me laughing, talking all at once, eager to show me her drawings or tell me about school. She had Thomas's eyes warm and curious, and when she smiled, it felt like something in my chest settled into place. But after Chloe and Ryan moved into their new house, a pristine, carefully decorated place in one of Savannah's newer developments, those visits began to feel different, structured. "Let's keep it to an hour today," Chloe would say as she opened the door, her smile bright, but her eyes already glancing at the clock behind me. "Emma has piano practice later." Of course she did. Emma suddenly had a lot of things. Piano, dance, language classes, activities that filled her schedule so neatly there was barely room left for anything unplanned, anything like me. At first I admired it. Chloe was giving Emma opportunities I had never been able to afford when Ryan was young. I told myself this was a good thing, a generous thing. But then I began to notice the way Emma behaved during those visits. She hesitated before speaking as if she were choosing her words carefully. She apologized for small things, spilling a drop of juice, laughing too loudly, even interrupting herself mid-sentence. "I'm sorry, Grandma," she would say, her little shoulders tightening. "For what, sweetheart?" I'd ask gently. She'd shrug. "I don't know. Just in case. Just in case. No child should live in just in case." One afternoon, while we were sitting together at the kitchen table coloring, she picked up the wrong crayon, at least wrong, by Chloe's standards. "Emma," Chloe said from across the room, her voice calm but sharp. "We talked about staying inside the lines." Emma froze. It wasn't a loud correction. There was no yelling, but something in the tone, something controlled and precise, made the air feel heavy. "I'm sorry," Emma whispered quickly, erasing part of her drawing so hard the paper tore. I looked up at Chloe. "She's just being creative." Chloe smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Structure helps children succeed, Skylar." Structure. There it was again. Another word that sounded reasonable. Until you lived inside it, I wanted to argue. To say that childhood wasn't something you should manage like a project. But Ryan was sitting right there, scrolling through his phone, and when he glanced up, he didn't look concerned. He looked accustomed. So I swallowed my words, because I didn't want to create tension, because I didn't want Emma to feel like she had to choose sides, because I still believed naively that if I was patient enough, everything would balance itself out. But patience, I would later learn, is not the same as protection. As the months passed, Chloe's control extended beyond Emma. It reached into every corner of family life. Holidays, once spontaneous and warm, became tightly scheduled events. "Dinner will be at 6. Please arrive no earlier than 5:50. Chloe texted 1 year, no earlier. I sat in my car for 10 minutes that evening, parked down the street like a guest waiting for permission to enter a stranger's home. When I finally knocked, Chloe greeted me with her usual polished smile. "Perfect timing," she said, as if I had passed some invisible test. Ryan kissed my cheek quickly, already distracted. Emma hugged me, but gently, carefully, as if she had been told not to wrinkle my clothes. During dinner, Chloe steered every conversation. When I tried to share a story from my teaching days, she laughed lightly. "Oh, Skylar, kids are so different now," she said. "Education has really evolved." I nodded, forcing a smile. "I'm sure it has." What I didn't say was that I had spent decades shaping young lives, that I knew something about children beyond schedules and optics, but Chloe had a way of making experience feel outdated, of turning wisdom into something quaint. And my Ryan began to echo her. "Mom, things aren't like they used to be," he said one evening when I suggested Emma might be overbooked. "She's 8, I replied softly. "She needs time to just be." "She's fine," he said a little too quickly. "Chloe's just making sure she has every advantage. Every advantage." The phrase sounded so noble, but the more I heard it, the more it felt like an excuse. An explanation that closed conversations instead of opening them. The hardest part wasn't Chloe, it was Ryan, because Chloe was consistent, predictable in her need for control, her focus on image, her subtle but persistent corrections. Ryan, on the other hand, changed. At first he would laugh off her comments, then he would agree with her, and eventually he would repeat her. "Mom, you can't just drop by anymore," he told me one afternoon when I showed up with homemade soup after Emma had been sick. "You should have called first." "I didn't want to bother you," I said. "It's not about bothering us," he replied, his tone tightening. "It's about respecting boundaries. Boundaries." I had taught him that word. Back when he was a teenager, struggling to say no to friends who took advantage of him, I had told him that boundaries were a way to protect yourself. I never imagined he would use them to keep me out. "I'm your mother," I said quietly. "And I'm your son," he replied. "But I have my own family now." The words weren't cruel, but they landed like a door closing. After that, I stopped dropping by. I started texting first, calling less, waiting to be invited, and invitations became rare. When I did see them, it felt managed, like I was being allowed access rather than welcomed. Diane noticed before I fully admitted it to myself. "You're disappearing from your own family," she said one afternoon as we sat on my porch watching the late summer sun dip behind the trees. "I'm just giving them space," I replied. She shook her head. "There's a difference between giving space and being pushed out. I'm not being pushed out." I insisted, though the words felt thin even as I said them. Diane looked at me for a long moment. "Skylar," she said gently, "when was the last time Ryan called you just to talk?" I opened my mouth and then closed it. I couldn't remember. "And when was the last time you saw Emma without Chloe setting the terms?" she continued. I looked down at my hands. "I don't want to cause problems," I whispered. Diane leaned forward, her voice firm but kind. "You're not the one causing them." That was the first time I allowed myself to consider the possibility that what I was experiencing wasn't just distance, it was design. A slow, careful reshaping of the family, with me at the edges. And the most frightening part, no one else seemed to see it. Or if they did, they didn't say anything. So I did what I had always done. I stayed quiet. I adjusted. I told myself it would pass. But silence has a way of growing, of making space for things that should never have been allowed in the first place. And by the time I realized how much had already changed, Chloe had done more than distance me. She had begun to rewrite who I was. There are moments in life that don't feel dramatic when they happen. No shouting, no slammed doors, no clear line between before and after. Just a quiet shift that changes everything. For me, it was a folded piece of paper. It happened on a Sunday afternoon. Chloe had invited me over for dinner, something that had become rare enough that I said yes without hesitation, even though a small part of me wondered why. The house looked exactly as it always did, perfect. Everything in its place. Soft, neutral tones, fresh flowers arranged just so, the faint scent of something expensive lingering in the air. Ryan greeted me with a quick hug. "Hey, Mom," he said. "Traffic okay?" "It wasn't bad," I replied, studying his face. There was a time when he would have asked how I was before anything else. Now conversation felt functional. Chloe appeared moments later, wiping her hands on a pristine white dish towel. "Skylar," she said, with that practiced warmth. "I'm so glad you could make it," I smiled. "Thank you for inviting me." Dinner was polite, that's the best word for it. Polite conversation, polite laughter, polite silence when something hovered too close to being real. Emma sat between us, her small hands folded neatly in her lap when she wasn't eating. She glanced at Chloe often as if checking for approval before speaking. "How was school?" I asked her gently. "Good," she said. "What did you learn?" She hesitated. Chloe answered instead. "They're working on advanced reading groups. Emma's already ahead." "That's wonderful," I said, smiling at Emma. Emma smiled back, but it was brief. "Careful." At one point, she dropped her fork. The sound was small, barely noticeable. But she froze. "I'm sorry," she said immediately, her voice tight. "It's okay, sweetheart," I said softly. "It happens." Chloe didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "Emma," she said, her tone even, "we've talked about being mindful at the table." Emma nodded quickly, her cheeks flushing. "Yes, Mommy, I'm sorry." Ryan kept eating. That was the moment I felt something twist inside me. Not because Chloe corrected her, but because of how Emma responded. Not like a child who had made a small mistake. Like someone who had broken a rule. After dinner, Chloe suggested Emma show me her room. "Just for a few minutes," she added. "She has an early morning tomorrow." Of course she did. Emma took my hand and led me upstairs. The moment we stepped into her room and closed the door, something changed. Her shoulders dropped. Her breathing eased. She looked like a child again. "Grandma, look," she said, pulling out a drawing from her desk. It was a picture of the three of us, Emma, Ryan, and Chloe, standing in front of their house. And then off to the side, there was me. Smaller, separate, but still there. "It's beautiful," I said, kneeling beside her. She beamed. "I made you a special one, too." She reached into her backpack and pulled out another piece of paper, but instead of handing it to me right away, she hesitated. Her eyes flicked toward the door. "Is Mommy coming?" she whispered. "I don't think so," I said gently. She nodded, then quickly folded the paper in half and pressed it into my hand. "Don't open it here," she said. My heart skipped. "Okay," I replied, keeping my voice calm. "I'll look at it later." She nodded again, relief softening her face. We spent a few more minutes looking at her books, her toys, everything arranged so neatly it felt more like a display than a child's space. Then Chloe called up from downstairs. "Emma, it's time to wind down." Emma squeezed my hand once before letting go. "Bye, Grandma," she said, her voice returning to that careful tone. "Good night, sweetheart." I left shortly after. Chloe walked me to the door. "Thanks again for coming," she said. "It means a lot to Emma to have consistency." Consistency. I nodded. Of course. Ryan gave me a quick hug. "Drive safe, Mom," and just like that, I was back in my car, alone. I sat there for a moment, the folded paper still in my hand. Something about the way Emma had given it to me, the urgency, the secrecy, made my chest tighten. I turned on the small overhead light and unfolded it carefully. The handwriting was uneven letters, slightly too big, some words misspelled, but I understood every single one. "Grandma, please don't be sad. Mommy says you make people tired. I don't think so. I love you." I stared at the words until they blurred. Not because I didn't understand them, but because I understood them too well. "Mommy says you make people tired." That wasn't something Emma had come up with on her own. That was something she had heard, repeated, internalized, and somehow accepted as truth. My hands began to shake. Not violently, not dramatically, just enough that I had to press the paper against my lap to steady it. I thought about every interaction I had with Chloe, every polite correction, every subtle comment, every time she had smiled while making me feel smaller, and I realized something that made my stomach turn. She hadn't just been speaking to other adults, she had been speaking to Emma about me, shaping how my granddaughter saw me, not as someone to love, but as someone to tolerate, someone who made people tired. A tear slipped down my cheek before I could stop it. I wiped it away quickly, even though there was no one there to see, because the pain wasn't just mine. It belonged to that little girl upstairs who had felt the need to warn me, to comfort me, to protect me from her own mother's words. That's when something shifted inside me. Up until that moment, I had been willing to endure discomfort, to accept distance, to tell myself that relationships change, that families evolve, that maybe I just needed to adapt. But this was different. This wasn't about me feeling left out. This was about a child being taught that love comes with conditions, that people can be quietly diminished until they believe they deserve it. I folded the paper carefully and placed it back in my purse. Then I sat there for a long time, staring out through the windshield at the dark, quiet street. I thought about Thomas, about the life we had built, about the values we had tried to pass on to Ryan, kindness, respect, integrity. And I wondered, where had it all gone? Or maybe the better question was, when had I stopped protecting it? The next morning I called Pastor Michael, not because I wanted to create conflict, but because I needed clarity. We met later that afternoon in his office, a small, simple room that always felt grounding. I handed him the note without saying a word. He read it slowly, his expression growing more serious with each line. When he looked up at me, his eyes were filled with something I hadn't expected. Not pity, concern. "Skylar," he said gently, "this isn't just a family disagreement. I know," I whispered. "This is influence," he continued. "An influence on a child is powerful." I knotted my throat tight. "I don't want to make things worse," I said. "I don't want to turn Emma against her mother." "You're not the one doing that," he replied quietly. The same words Diane had said, but hearing them again here made them harder to ignore. "So what do I do?" I asked. Pastor Michael leaned back slightly, considering. "You start by seeing clearly," he said, "and then you decide what you're willing to accept." I sat with that for a moment. What I was willing to accept. For years, I had believed that being a good mother and now a good grandmother meant being patient, understanding, forgiving. But no one had ever told me that sometimes. It also meant drawing a line. I left his office that day with the note still in my purse, but it felt heavier now, not because of what it said, but because of what it revealed. This wasn't just about hurt feelings. This was about something deeper, something more deliberate, and for the first time, I stopped asking myself how to keep the peace and started asking a different question entirely. What is this really about? The question followed me home. What is this really about? For days, I couldn't shake it. It echoed in the quiet moments while I watered the plants Thomas used to tend, while I folded laundry no one else would see, while I sat at the piano and let my fingers hover over the keys without pressing them. Because once you ask a question like that, you can't unask it. And worse, you start noticing things you once ignored. I began with something simple. I went through my phone, not dramatically, not like I was searching for evidence in a courtroom, just slowly, thoughtfully, Scrolling through months of messages between me, Ryan, and Chloe, at first glance, everything looked normal, polite, civil, even affectionate at times. But when I read more carefully, really read, a pattern began to emerge. Plans that were suggested, then quietly changed. Visits that were agreed upon, then rescheduled, then canceled. Conversations that ended just as they began to turn personal. And always woven through it all, Chloe's voice, gentle, reasonable, impossible to argue with, without sounding unreasonable yourself. Emma has a lot going on this week. We're trying to keep things consistent. It might be overwhelming for her right now. Every message was defensible. Every explanation made sense on its own. But together they formed a wall, a soft one, a polite one, but a wall nonetheless. I set my phone down and leaned back in my chair, my chest tight with a realization I had been avoiding. This wasn't distance that had happened naturally. This was distance that had been designed, and I had helped build it by stepping back every time I was asked. The thought stung more than I expected, because it meant that part of this, part of losing my place in my own family, was something I had allowed. Not caused, but allowed. I didn't sleep much that night. Instead, I sat at the kitchen table with a notebook, one I used to jot down music ideas, and I started writing. Not feelings, facts, dates of canceled visits, exact phrases Chloe had used, moments that had felt off but that I had dismissed at the time. At first it felt unnecessary, almost obsessive, but as the pages filled, something shifted, clarity. Because when things live only in your memory, they blur, they soften. They can be explained away, but on paper, they stay exactly as they are. And what I saw in those pages was not misunderstanding. It was consistency. The next step came unexpectedly. About a week later, Chloe called me. That alone was unusual enough that I hesitated before answering. "Hello," I said. "Skylar." She greeted me, her voice bright. "I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time." "No, it's fine. I was just thinking about you," she continued. "We haven't seen you in a while." I almost laughed. "We haven't seen you." As if I had been the one creating the distance. "I'd love to come by sometime," I said carefully. There was a brief pause. Of course, Chloe replied smoothly. "We just need to coordinate schedules. Emma's been so busy." Busy. Always busy. But then her tone shifted slightly. "Actually," she added, "I wanted to ask you something." I straightened a little in my chair. "What is it?" "Well," she said lightly, "Ryan and I have been talking about the future. You know, planning ahead, making sure everything is organized." Organized. Another one of her words. "That's important," I said. "Yes," she agreed. "And we realized we don't actually know much about your situation. Your home, your finances, your plans." There it was. Not hidden, not even particularly subtle. Just presented as reasonable concern. "I've been managing just fine," I replied, keeping my voice even. "I'm sure you have," Chloe said quickly. "But things can change, Skylar. And it's better to be proactive than reactive." Proactive. I could almost hear the checklist in her mind. We were thinking, she continued, maybe we could sit down together. Go over everything. Just so we're all on the same page. All on the same page. The phrase made my stomach tighten. Because I suddenly understood something I hadn't fully allowed myself to see before. This wasn't just about control over time, or access, or image. This was about positioning. Slowly, carefully, Chloe had been creating a narrative, one where I was aging, becoming less capable, more dependent, and therefore in need of guidance, of oversight, of someone to step in and help, someone like her. "I appreciate your concern," I said, choosing each word carefully, "but I'm not at a point where I need assistance with those things." There was another pause. Longer this time. "Well," Chloe said finally, her tone still pleasant but tighter. "Now it's not really about need. It's about planning." "I've done my planning," I replied. "Have you?" she asked softly. The question wasn't rude, but it wasn't kind either. It carried an implication. That maybe I didn't know what I was doing. That maybe I needed someone more capable. "I have," I said more firmly this time. Another pause. Then just as smoothly as before she shifted gears. "Of course," she said lightly. "I didn't mean to overstep. I just care about making sure everything is secure for everyone. For everyone, not for me, for everyone." We ended the call a few minutes later, the conversation dissolving back into politeness as if nothing unusual had been said. but everything had changed, because now I knew, or at least I knew enough. That evening, I called David Coleman. He had been Thomas's attorney for years before becoming mine, a steady, thoughtful man who never rushed his words and never made assumptions. "Skylar," he said when he answered, "it's good to hear from you." "I need to review my estate plan," I said. There was a brief pause. "Of course," he replied. "Has something changed?" "Yes," I said quietly. "I think it has." We met the next morning. I brought my notebook with me, not because I intended to show it to him, but because it reminded me to stay focused, to speak clearly, to not let emotion cloud what I was beginning to understand. David listened carefully as I explained the situation. He didn't interrupt, didn't rush me. And when I finished, he folded his hands on the desk and looked at me with a seriousness that made my chest tighten. "Skylar," he said, "what you're describing isn't uncommon." I frowned slightly. "It's not." "No," he said gently. "In situations where there are assets involved, property savings, anything of value, family dynamics can shift, that word again. But I trust my son," I said quickly, "and I'm not suggesting you shouldn't," David replied. But trust and influence are two different things. I sat back in my chair, absorbing that. "Do you believe someone is trying to gain control over your estate?" he asked carefully. The question felt heavy, not because I didn't understand it, but because saying yes would make it real. I think, I began slowly, "someone is trying to position themselves too." David nodded. "That's a crucial distinction," he said, "and it means you still have time to act. Time to act." The phrase settled over me like a quiet kind of power. "What should I do?" I asked. "We start by strengthening your existing plan," he said, "clarifying your intentions, ensuring there is no ambiguity, no room for interpretation, no space for someone else to step in and rewrite what I had built." And he added, "We make sure that any future decisions about your care or your assets are made by people you trust on your terms." I thought about Ryan, about the boy he had been, about the man he was becoming. And for the first time, I allowed myself to question whether those two people were still the same. "I understand," I said quietly. When I left David's office, I felt different. Not lighter, not relieved, but steadier. Because for the first time since all of this had begun, I wasn't just reacting. I was preparing, and somewhere deep beneath the hurt and confusion, a new feeling began to take shape. Not anger, not even fear, but something colder, clearer awareness, because whatever Chloe thought she was building, I was finally starting to see it. And once you see something clearly, you can't be controlled by it anymore. Once you start seeing clearly, you begin to notice not just what people say, but what they plant. It wasn't long after my meeting with David that I realized Chloe wasn't just trying to understand my situation. She was shaping how others understood me. The first hint came from someone I never expected. Mrs. Henderson, my neighbor of 15 years. She was the kind of woman who knew everything that happened on our street but never said anything unkind. The type who baked too many pies and always insisted you take one home whether you wanted it or not. We ran into each other one morning while I was checking my mailbox. "Skylar," she said warmly, "I've been meaning to call you." "That sounds serious," I replied with a small smile. She hesitated, just for a second, but I saw it. "Well," she said carefully, "I heard you might be making some changes." My fingers tightened slightly around the stack of mail in my hand. "What kind of changes?" I asked. "Oh, nothing bad," she rushed to say. "Just that you might be moving into one of those lovely communities, where everything is taken care of." My heart didn't drop. It didn't race. It did something else entirely. It went still. "I haven't made any plans like that," I said calmly. "Oh," she replied, clearly surprised. I must have misunderstood. "Where did you hear that?" I asked, keeping my tone light. She shifted, slightly uncomfortable now. "I spoke to Chloe at the market last week," she admitted. "She mentioned you were considering your options." "Considering your options?" I nodded slowly. "Well," I said gently, "I appreciate you thinking of me, but I'm quite comfortable where I am." "Of course you are," Mrs. Henderson said quickly. "You've always been so independent." Independent. The same word Chloe had used months ago. But now, I understood the difference. Before it had sounded like a compliment, now it sounded like a condition, something that could be revoked. We exchanged a few more pleasantries before parting ways, but I barely registered them, because my mind was already working, already connecting pieces. Chloe hadn't confronted me directly again about my finances, but she had started something else, a narrative, a quiet, polite, socially acceptable narrative, one where I was considering my options, where I might be better off in a managed environment, where independence was becoming questionable. And the most dangerous part? She wasn't saying anything that could be proven false. She was suggesting, implying, allowing others to fill in the gaps. That's how reputations change, not with one bold lie, but with a series of small, believable suggestions. I went back inside my house and sat at the kitchen table, the same notebook from before, still resting there. For a long moment, I just stared at it. Then I opened it and added a new section, conversations about my condition. Underneath, I wrote, Mrs. Henderson heard from Chloe that I'm considering assisted living. The words looked strange on the page, detached, almost clinical, but writing them down did something important. It made the pattern visible. And once again, the pattern was there. Later that week, it happened again. This time, it was Pastor Michael. We were speaking after Sunday service, discussing a small community program I had been helping with. You've always had such a gift with people, Skylar, he said. It's a blessing. I smiled. Thank you. He hesitated, then added gently, if you ever feel like things are becoming overwhelming, please know you don't have to handle everything alone. I looked at him carefully. I appreciate that, I said, but I'm doing all right. I'm glad to hear it, he replied. Chloe mentioned you might be going through a period of adjustment. There it was again. Not concern based on observation. Concern based on information. Information that had come from Chloe. I said, my voice calm but firm. He nodded slowly, reading something in my expression. I understand, he said quietly, and in that moment I saw it. The realization in his eyes, the shift. He wasn't questioning me anymore. He was questioning what he had been told. After he walked away, I stood there for a long time watching people gather in small groups, laughing, talking, living their lives without realizing how easily perception could be altered, how quickly someone's identity could be reshaped if the right person told the right story in the right way. That afternoon, I called Diane. She's talking about me, I said without preamble. Diane didn't sound surprised. I figured she replied, she's telling people I'm not stable, that I might need help. Diane let out a slow breath. That's how it starts. My grip tightened on the phone. Starts what control, she said simply. The word hung in the air between us. I don't understand how Ryan can't see it. I said, my voice quieter now, because she's not doing it in a way that looks like control. Diane replied, she's doing it in a way that looks like care. Care, of course. That was the brilliance of it. No one questions care. No one challenges concern, especially when it's wrapped in politeness and presented in public. I need to talk to him, I said. Do you? Diane asked gently. The question caught me off guard. What do you mean? She said, what are you expecting him to do if you talk to him right now? I opened my mouth and then paused. Because the truth was, I didn't know. Defend me, believe me. Stand up to Chloe. Those were things I wanted, but were they things he was capable of? At this point, he's still under her influence, Diane continued. If you confront him without proof, you risk making her narrative stronger. I closed my eyes briefly. She'll say I'm emotional, I murmured. Exactly. And that I'm overreacting. Yes. And he'll believe her. I finished. Diane didn't answer. She didn't need to. We both knew. Silence settled between us for a moment before she spoke again. So what are you going to do? I looked down at the notebook in front of me, at the growing list of observations, of patterns, of quiet manipulations, and for the first time, I didn't feel confused. I'm going to keep watching, I said. Diane's tone softened slightly. That doesn't sound like you. It's not, I admitted. You've always been direct. I know. Then why change now? I thought about that for a moment, about who I had been, a woman who believed in honesty, in addressing problems openly, in trusting that truth would be enough. That version of me assumed everyone was playing by the same rules, I said quietly. And now, Diane asked. Now I know they're not. The words didn't feel bitter. They felt real because Chloe wasn't attacking me openly. She wasn't creating scenes or making accusations I could directly refute. She was doing something far more effective. She was shaping perception, and if I wanted to protect myself, if I wanted to protect Emma, I couldn't respond emotionally. I had to respond strategically. "I'm not going to confront her," I said. "Not yet." Diane was quiet for a moment. Then slowly she said, "Okay." There was no judgment in her voice, only understanding. "But Skylar," she added gently, "be careful. I will." Because the truth was, this was no longer about hurt feelings or family tension or misunderstandings that could be resolved with a conversation. This was something else, something deliberate, and whatever Chloe was building, it wasn't just meant to push me out. It was meant to replace me, not just in my family, but in how the world saw me. And that kind of thing doesn't happen by accident. Once you accept that something is deliberate, you stop looking for comfort. You start looking for truth. And the truth I would soon learn had been waiting for me longer than I realized. It began with Diane. A few days after our last conversation, she called me early in the morning, earlier than usual. "Skylar." She said, her voice low but focused. "I need you to meet me for coffee." Something in her tone made me sit up straighter. "Is everything okay? I think so," she replied, "but I've come across something you should hear in person." That was enough. We met at a small cafe just off Abercorn Street, the kind of place we'd gone to for years. Quiet, familiar, safe. Diane was already there when I arrived, sitting by the window with her coffee untouched. She didn't smile when she saw me. That's how I knew whatever she had to say mattered. "Tell me," I said as I sat down. She leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice. "I ran into someone yesterday," she began. "A woman named Lauren Pierce. The name didn't mean anything to me. I don't think I know her," I said. "You don't?" Diane replied. "But Chloe does. That got my attention." How they used to move in the same social circle in Charleston, Diane explained, a few years before Chloe met Ryan. Charleston, another city, another version of Chloe's life. "What did she say?" I asked. Diane hesitated, as if choosing her words carefully. "At first, nothing unusual," she said, "just small talk. But when I mentioned your name, your connection to Chloe, her entire expression changed." A chill moved through me. "Changed how, like she recognized a pattern," Diane said quietly. I felt my fingers curl slightly around the edge of the table. "What pattern?" Diane took a breath. "She told me Chloe was engaged once before she said." I blinked. "That's not unusual." "No," Diane agreed. "What is unusual is how it ended." Something in her voice made my chest tighten. "Go on." Diane leaned closer. "Lauren said Chloe became very close to her fiancé's mother," she explained. "At first everything seemed perfect. She was attentive, respectful, almost overly so. That sounded familiar, too familiar. But over time," Diane continued, "things started to shift. Subtle criticisms, comments about how the mother was overwhelmed, out of touch, struggling to keep up." My breath slowed. Not because I was calm, but because I was listening, really listening. And then I asked, and then Chloe began suggesting that the mother might be better off. "With more support," Diane said. Support, the same word. She framed it as concern. Diane went on. "Talked to other family members, friends, even a few professionals." My stomach turned. "She was building a case," I whispered. Diane nodded. "That's what Lauren said." Silence fell between us for a moment. The cafe around us continued as if nothing had changed. Cups, clinking quiet conversations, the hum of ordinary life. But inside me, everything was shifting. "What happened to that family?" I asked finally. "The engagement ended," Diane said abruptly. Why, Diane's eyes met mine. "Because the mother pushed back," she said, hard. A strange mix of relief and dread moved through me. She confronted Chloe. "Yes." "And according to Lauren," Diane said slowly, "it turned into a mess. Accusations, denials, a lot of things that couldn't be proven one way or the other. That made sense. Chloe didn't deal in things that could be easily proven. She walked away without losing anything significant," Diane added, "at least not publicly." Of course she did. I sat back in my chair, my mind racing. This wasn't just similarity. This wasn't coincidence. This was method, a practiced, refined method. "She's done this before," I said quietly. Diane didn't respond immediately. She didn't need to. We both knew. She targets the same dynamic I continued thinking out loud now, a family with something to protect, a mother who values harmony, a son who trusts her. And then she reshapes it, Diane said softly. I nodded piece by piece, without force, without confrontation, until the original structure barely exists. A cold clarity settled over me. Not panic, not even anger, something else, recognition. How sure is Lauren, I asked. She seemed certain, Diane replied, but she also said something important. What that Chloe never crosses a line she can't step back from. I frowned slightly. What does that mean? It means she stays just within the boundaries of what can be defended, Diane explained. Everything she does can be explained as concern, as misunderstanding, as someone else being too sensitive, too sensitive. The words felt familiar, because I had used them myself. To dismiss my own instincts, to justify her behavior, to keep the peace. She counts on people not wanting to create conflict, Diane added. I let out a slow breath. Yes, I said, she does. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Diane reached across the table and placed her hand over mine. Skylar, she said gently, you need to be very careful. I know. This isn't just about being right, she continued. It's about protecting yourself. And Emma, I added quietly. Diane's expression softened. Yes, she said, and Emma, because that was the part that mattered most. Not the house, not the money, not even my place in the family. Emma. The little girl who whispered apologies, who checked the door before handing me a note, who was already learning that love could come with conditions. She's growing up in this, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Diane squeezed my hand. Then you already know what you have to do. I nodded slowly. Yes, I did. But knowing something and doing something are not the same. Because action changes things, it forces outcomes. And once you step into that space, there's no going back. I'm not ready to confront her, I said. Diane studied me. Then what are you ready for? I thought about that, about everything I had seen, everything I had learned, everything I was beginning to understand. I'm ready to stop being passive, I said finally. Diane's lips curved slightly. That's a start. I looked out the window watching people pass by, strangers moving through their own lives, unaware of the quiet wars that could unfold inside something as simple as a family. She thinks I don't see her, I said. Diane followed my gaze. Do you want her to know that you do not yet? Because the truth was, seeing someone clearly gives you power, but revealing that you see them, that gives them a chance to adapt, to adjust, to become harder to read. No, I continued. Right now, I need her to believe exactly what she already believes. And what's that? Diane asked. I turned back to her, my expression calm. That I'm still the same person I've always been. The one who avoids conflict. The one who trusts too easily. The one who can be quietly moved. Diane held my gaze for a moment. Then slowly she nodded. All right, she said. But there was something else in her expression now. Something new. Respect. Because for the first time since this had begun, I wasn't just reacting. I was thinking ahead. And somewhere beneath all the hurt and confusion, a different kind of strength was beginning to take shape. Not loud, not obvious, but steady. Because Chloe wasn't the only one who could learn from patterns. And now that I understood hers, I could start to build my own. Once you understand someone's pattern, the next step isn't confrontation. It's timing. Because truth revealed too early can be dismissed, but truth revealed at the right moment can't be ignored. I didn't tell Chloe that I knew. I didn't confront Ryan. I didn't even change my behavior in any obvious way. On the surface, I remained exactly who they believed me to be. Quiet, accommodating, grateful for whatever space I was given. But underneath, I was watching, listening, preparing. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. It arrived in the form of a cream-colored envelope embossed with gold lettering. Chloe had always been particular about presentation. I shouldn't have been surprised. Still, when I opened it and read the contents, something inside me went very still. A celebration of achievement and family honoring Ryan Bennett's promotion and Emma's 8th birthday, hosted by Chloe Bennett. No mention of me, not as a co-host, not as a contributor, not even as family, just absent. I read the invitation twice, Then a third time, looking for some small acknowledgement I might have missed. There was none. But what did catch my attention was the guest list printed discreetly on the insert. Names I recognized. Ryan's senior colleagues from the bank, members of our church, several women from Chloe's event planning network, community figures, people who mattered, people whose opinions shaped reputations. This wasn't just a party. It was a stage, and Chloe was directing it. Later that afternoon, I received a call from Ryan. "Hey, Mom," he said, his tone slightly rushed. "Did you get the invitation I did?" I replied evenly. "Great," he said. "Chloe's put a lot of work into this. I can see that." There was a brief pause. "You're coming, right?" he asked. The question lingered between us. Not "we'd love for you to be there." Not "it wouldn't be the same without you." Just, "You're coming, right?" as if attendance were expected but not necessarily desired. "I'll be there," I said. "Good," he replied, relief flickering in his voice. "It's important. Important." Another carefully chosen word for who I almost asked, but I didn't. Instead, I said I understand. We ended the call shortly after. I sat in my living room for a long time, the invitation resting on the table in front of me, a celebration of family, hosted by Chloe, with me, quietly erased. The irony wasn't lost on me. That evening, I called Diane. "She's doing it publicly now," I said. "I figured she would," Diane replied. "What kind of event is it?" "Not just a party," I said. "A performance." Diane didn't need more explanation. "And you're going?" she asked. "Yes." There was a pause. "Are you sure that's wise?" she asked gently. I looked at the invitation again, at the carefully curated guest list, at the absence of my name. "She's built this moment," I said slowly. "She's invited the right people, set the right scene, and then I think she believes she controls the narrative." Diane's voice softened. "And do you?" "No." Because for the first time, I didn't feel like a participant in Chloe's design. I felt like an observer, and soon, something more. "I'm not going to avoid this," I continued. "If anything, I need to be there." "To defend yourself?" Diane asked. I shook my head even though she couldn't see me. "No." Then why I leaned back in my chair, my eyes drifting to the piano across the room, to the place where I'd spent years teaching students that timing wasn't just important, it was everything. "Because she's about to show everyone exactly who she is," I said quietly. Diane didn't respond immediately. Then slowly she asked, "And what are you going to do when she does?" I thought about that, about the notebook, the patterns, the conversations, the carefully constructed image Chloe had been building. "I'm going to let her," I said. And then I closed my eyes for a moment. "And then I'm going to tell the truth." Diane exhaled softly. "That's a dangerous plan. Only if I do it wrong. And if you do it right, I open my eyes. Then it won't be my word against hers." Silence. Then quietly, Diane said, "You've changed." "Yes," I replied. "I think I have." Because the truth was, the version of me who would have avoided this situation entirely, who would have stayed home, made an excuse, protected her pride by retreating, no longer existed. That version of me had believed that peace was always the best outcome. But peace built on silence, on erasure, on allowing someone else to define you. That wasn't peace. It was surrender. And I was no longer willing to surrender. Over the next few days, I prepared, not in the way Chloe would have. There were no spreadsheets, no rehearsals, no staged conversations. Instead, I reviewed everything I had gathered, the messages, the notes, the patterns. I spoke again with David, ensuring that every legal detail was in place, clear, unquestionable, protected. I didn't tell him what I intended to do at the party, but I suspect he understood. "Clarity is your strongest position," he told me before I left. "As long as you stay within it, no one can twist it. No one can twist it." That mattered, because Chloe's strength had always been her ability to shape perception, to blur lines, to make people question what they saw. I couldn't fight that with emotion. I had to meet it with precision. The morning of the party arrived quietly. Sunlight filtered through my curtains, soft and steady. For a moment I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the silence of the house. A familiar silence, but it felt different now. Not empty, not lonely, just calm. I got up slowly and walked to the closet. For a long time, I simply stood there looking at the rows of clothing. Nothing extravagant, nothing designed to impress. Just pieces that had carried me through different chapters of my life. My hand paused on a simple navy dress. Elegant, understated, timeless. Thomas had always liked that one. You look like yourself in that, he used to say. Not younger, not trendier. Just myself. I took it off the hanger, because that's who I needed to be that night. Not who Chloe expected, not who she had described, but who I actually was. When I arrived at the country club that evening, the parking lot was already full. Luxury cars, well-dressed guests, soft music drifting through the open doors. It was beautiful, impressive, exactly the kind of environment Chloe thrived in. I paused for a moment before stepping inside, not out of hesitation, but awareness, because I knew the moment I crossed that threshold, everything that had been building would begin to unfold, and there would be no turning back. Inside, the room was already alive with conversation. Crystal glasses clinked, laughter rose and fell, waitstaff moved gracefully between clusters of guests, and at the center of it all was Chloe. Radiant, confident, perfectly in control. She spotted me almost immediately. Her smile didn't falter. Of course it didn't. "Skylar," she said, gliding toward me. "You made it." I said I would, I replied. She leaned in, brushing my cheek lightly with hers. "We're so glad you're here," she said. "We." I glanced past her. Ryan stood across the room, speaking with two men in suits. For a brief second, our eyes met. Then he looked away. Something inside me registered that, not with pain, not anymore, with clarity. "Let me introduce you to a few people," Chloe said, already guiding me forward. And just like that, the performance began. But this time, I wasn't just part of the audience. If you've ever walked into a room and felt like you didn't belong, you know it doesn't take words. It's in the pauses, the glances, the way conversations shift just slightly when you step closer. That night, I felt all of it. But for the first time, I didn't shrink. Chloe moved beside me like a practiced host, her hand lightly guiding my elbow as she led me from one group to another. "Everyone, this is Skylar Ryan's mother," she said, her smile flawless. Ryan's mother, not family, not part of this celebration, just a relation, a detail. "Oh, how lovely to meet you," a woman in a silver dress said, her tone polite but distracted. "Yes, of course," a man added, already turning back to Ryan, who had joined us with a tight professional smile. "Mom," he said, giving me a brief nod. "This is Mr. Collins, one of our senior directors." "It's a pleasure," I said, extending my hand. Mr. Collins shook at his grip firm, his attention already drifting back to Ryan. "He's been doing excellent work," he said. "Very promising." "I'm not surprised," I replied. Ryan didn't meet my eyes. That was something I noticed more and more that evening. He wasn't avoiding me completely, just selectively, as if acknowledging me too fully might disrupt something Chloe had carefully arranged. We moved through the room like that for a while. Introductions, small talk, smiles that didn't quite settle. And always Chloe just half a step ahead, framing each interaction, steering each conversation, maintaining control. Skylar used to teach music, she said, at one point, her tone light. She's very passionate about it. Used to. A subtle emphasis, as if my relevance existed only in the past. That must have been rewarding, someone said. It was, I replied simply. I didn't elaborate, didn't defend, didn't try to prove anything, because I had already learned something important about Chloe's world. The more you explain yourself, the more room you give someone else to redefine you. So I stayed still, present, observant, and I watched. I watched the way Chloe interacted with Ryan's colleagues, confident, charming, effortlessly aligning herself with their expectations. I watched the way she positioned Emma, guiding her gently but firmly through the room, prompting her to greet guests, to smile, to perform. And I watched Emma. That was the hardest part. Because even in that beautiful dress, even with her hair perfectly styled and her posture carefully corrected, she still looked like a child trying to remember the rules of a game she didn't fully understand. When she saw me, her face lit up just for a second. "Grandma," she said, breaking away from Chloe's side and running toward me. I opened my arms instinctively, pulling her into a hug. For that brief moment, everything felt real again. "Hi, sweetheart," I whispered. She hugged me tightly, not carefully, not cautiously, just tightly. "I missed you," she said. "I missed you too." And then Emma, Chloe's voice. Not loud, not sharpy, but enough. Emma pulled back immediately, her body shifting as if she had remembered something important. "Go say hello to Mrs. Turner," Chloe said, smiling at the woman standing nearby. "Remember what we practiced?" Emma nodded quickly. "Yes, Mommy." And just like that, the moment was gone. She walked away, her small shoulders straightening her expression, resetting into something polite and controlled. I watched her go, and something inside me settled even deeper, because now I didn't just understand what Chloe was doing. I could see its effect, clearly, visibly, and that made everything else simpler. The evening continued. More guests arrived, more conversations, more carefully curated moments. At one point, I found myself standing near Pastor Michael. "Skylar," he said, warmly, his eyes searching mine. "It's good to see you." "You too," I replied. He hesitated. "I've been thinking about what you said last week," he added quietly. "So have I." He nodded slightly as if that confirmed something for him. "This is quite an event," he said, glancing around the room. "It is," I agreed. "Chloe has done a remarkable job. She has." There was a pause. Then gently he said, "You seem very calm." I almost smiled. "That surprises you." "A little," he admitted. "It doesn't surprise me," I said, because calm, I had learned, was not the absence of emotion. It was the result of understanding. Across the room, I saw Diane enter. Our eyes met briefly. She didn't wave, didn't draw attention, just gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. She was here. That was enough. A few minutes later, I noticed another familiar face. Lauren Pierce. She stood near the bar, speaking quietly with a man I didn't recognize. She looked exactly as Diane had described. Composed, observant, the kind of person who noticed things others missed. For a moment, our eyes met. She didn't smile, but she didn't look away either. And in that silent exchange, there was understanding. Not friendship, not alliance, just recognition. Of something we both knew. Something Chloe had assumed would stay hidden. I turned my attention back to the room, to the guests, to the flow of the evening, because now I could see it all. The structure, the intention, the way Chloe had positioned herself at the center, not just as a hostess, but as a narrative, a story she was telling about her life, her family, her success. And in that story, there was no room for me, at least not in any meaningful way. I was a footnote, a background detail, something to be acknowledged, but not emphasized. And for most of the night, I let it be that way. I didn't interrupt, didn't challenge, didn't step outside the role she had assigned me, because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is let someone believe they are in control. As the evening moved toward its peak, the music softened slightly. Glasses were refilled, guests gathered closer to the stage, and Chloe stepped forward. "Thank you all for being here tonight." She began, her voice smooth and confident. The room quieted. All eyes turned toward her. She smiled, taking in the moment. "This evening is about celebrating something very special," she continued. "Ryan's incredible achievement and our beautiful Emma." Applause followed. Ryan stepped beside her, placing a hand lightly at her back. Emma stood nearby, her small hands clasped in front of her. Chloe continued speaking about hard work, dedication, family support. The words were perfect, polished, exactly what people expected to hear. And as she spoke, I listened. Not just to what she was saying, but to what she was leaving out. Because omission can be just as revealing as anything else. And none of this would be possible without the people who stand beside us. She said, her voice warm. I felt a shift in the room, an expectation. This was the moment, the acknowledgement, the recognition of family. Chloe's gaze moved across the crowd. She mentioned colleagues, friends, mentors, each name carefully chosen, each role clearly defined. And then she looked at me, just for a second. Her smile didn't change, but something in her eyes did, a flicker, a decision. And then she spoke. "Well," she said lightly, "some people are just part of the background, I suppose." A few guests laughed softly, unsure, and then she turned fully toward me and said it, clear, sharp, impossible to misunderstand. "Nobody can stand you." The words cut through the room like silence breaking. Laughter died instantly. Glasses stilled mid-air. Every conversation stopped. I could feel it, the shift. The weight of dozens of eyes turning toward me, waiting, expecting. Ryan's voice came quickly, low and urgent, "Chloe." But it was too late, because something inside me had already made its decision. Not in that moment, not because of what she said, but because of everything that had led up to it. I felt the humiliation. Of course I did. I felt the sting, the exposure, the quiet confirmation of every whisper she had ever planted. But beneath all of that, there was something else. Stillness, the kind that comes when you stop questioning what's happening and start understanding it. I didn't argue, didn't raise my voice, didn't defend myself. Instead, I took a breath and I smiled. Then slowly, I stepped forward, past the stunned guests, past Ryan, past Chloe, up onto the stage. The microphone stood there, waiting. I reached for it, and for the first time that night, I was no longer part of her story. I was about to tell my own. There's a moment just before you speak when the entire world seems to hold its breath. I felt it as my fingers closed around the microphone. Not fear, not hesitation, just clarity. The room was silent. Dozens of faces turned toward me, some curious, some uncomfortable, some already forming quiet judgments about what kind of scene might unfold next. Chloe stood a few feet away, her posture still composed, her expression controlled, but her eyes, they were watching me now, carefully. Ryan hovered beside her, his jaw tight, his voice low. "Mom, please don't make this worse." Worse. I almost smiled at that, because from where I stood, there was no worse left to make, only truth. I lifted the microphone slowly, the soft hum of feedback brushing through the room. And then in the calmest voice I had used all evening, I spoke. "Thank you, Chloe." The words landed gently, unexpectedly. A ripple of confusion moved through the crowd. Chloe blinked just once. I continued. "Thank you for saying that out loud," I said, "because it's something you've been very careful to say. Everywhere else." Silence deepened. You could feel it now, not just attention, but tension. The kind that settles into a room when people realize they are no longer watching a celebration. They are witnessing something real. I didn't raise my voice, didn't change my tone, because I didn't need to. I think I went on, "It's important that when something has been happening quietly for a long time, it finally gets the chance to be seen clearly." I paused, letting the words settle. Across the room, I saw Pastor Michael shift slightly. Diane stood still, her expression unreadable. Lauren watched with the same quiet focus she had held all evening. And Chloe was still smiling, but it had changed, just slightly. Because now she didn't know exactly where this was going, and that was something she wasn't used to. I've spent the past few years, I continued trying to understand my place in my own family. A murmur moved through the room, soft, barely there, but present. I told myself it was normal, I said, that families grow, that things change, that I needed to step back and make space. I glanced briefly at Ryan. He looked down. I believed, I went on, that patience would lead to peace. Another pause. But what I didn't understand was that while I was stepping back, I let the sentence hang. Someone else was stepping in. This time the murmur was louder, not disruptive, but unmistakable, because now people were listening, not just hearing, listening. I didn't notice it at first, I said, because it didn't look like control. I looked toward Chloe, meeting her eyes fully for the first time that night. It looked like concern, a flicker. There it was. Small, but real. So many thoughtful words, I continued. Structure, consistency, planning. I spoke them gently, almost kindly, but I could feel the shift in the room, because those words, so reasonable, so familiar, suddenly sounded different when placed side by side. When you hear them, once I said they sound helpful. A few guests nodded almost unconsciously, but when you hear them again, and again, and again, I let the repetition linger. They begin to shape something else. I turned slightly, addressing the room more broadly now. They begin to shape how people see you. A woman near the back shifted her weight. Mr. Collins frowned slightly, not in disagreement, in thought. They begin to suggest, I continued, that you are less capable than you used to be. The words were quiet, but they carried. That you might be overwhelmed, that you might need help, that maybe you're not quite yourself anymore. I could feel it now. The room wasn't just listening, it was remembering. Because Chloe hadn't just spoken to me, she had spoken to them, each of them, in small conversations, carefully framed, easily dismissed, until now. I started hearing things I said, not directly, Not from Chloe, from others. I let my gaze move across the room, not accusing, not targeting, just acknowledging. A neighbor who thought I was considering moving out of my home. A slight shift from one side of the room. A conversation after church where concern was offered for a period of adjustment I hadn't experienced. Pastor Michael's expression tightened slightly, and always I said my voice steady, it came from the same place. I paused. Then I said it. Chloe. The name landed softly, but it landed. Chloe's smile remained, but it no longer reached her eyes. This wasn't loud, I continued. It wasn't dramatic. It was careful, consistent, strategic. The last word hung in the air. I saw it then. The moment when the room began to understand, not fully, not completely, but enough. Enough to question, enough to see. I didn't confront it at first, I said, because I wanted to believe it wasn't intentional. I looked at Chloe again, but eventually, I had to ask myself a different question. I let the silence stretch. What is this really about? No one moved. No one spoke. Because now, they were waiting. And Chloe was no longer in control of the story. I lowered the microphone slightly, just enough to soften the sound of my voice. Not as a retreat, as a shift. Because what came next wasn't just about what had been done. It was about why. And why changes everything. The silence in the room had weight now, not the polite silence of a formal event, but the kind that presses against your chest, asking you to understand what you're witnessing. I could feel it, and for the first time that night, I knew something with complete certainty. Chloe had lost control of the narrative. Not entirely, not yet, but enough. I lifted the microphone again, my hand steady. Because once I asked that question, I said softly, I stopped looking at what things sounded like. I let my gaze move across the room, and I started looking at what they were. A subtle shift rippled through the crowd. Curiosity had turned into attention, and attention into something deeper. I began to write things down, I continued. Not feelings, not assumptions, facts. The word landed cleanly. I wrote down when visits were canceled, and how often. A few people glanced at each other. I wrote down the phrases that were used. It might be overwhelming. We're trying to keep things consistent. It's better to plan ahead. Each phrase spoken calmly, each one familiar, but now placed together, connected. And then I said, my voice softening slightly, I started to notice what those words were doing. I paused. They were creating distance, not accusation, observation. That distance I went on made it easier for something else to happen. I turned slightly, letting my eyes rest briefly on Ryan. Silence. His shoulders stiffened. And silence, I said gently, has a way of becoming permission, if we're not careful. A quiet murmur moved through the room again. This time it wasn't confusion, it was recognition. I let the moment breathe, then continued. There was another part I couldn't ignore. I reached into my purse, slowly, deliberately, and pulled out a small folded piece of paper, the same one I had carried with me since that night in Emma's room. I held it for a moment before opening it. I wasn't going to share this, I said quietly, because it's personal. My voice didn't break, but something in it shifted. But sometimes, what's personal is also what's most important. I unfolded the note, carefully smoothing it between my fingers. This was given to me by my granddaughter, I said. The room seemed to lean in, not physically, but emotionally, listening. I read it exactly as it was written. Grandma, please don't be sad. Mommy says you make people tired. I don't think so. I love you. The words hung in the air, simple, innocent, devastating. For a moment, no one moved. No one spoke, because there was nothing to interpret, nothing to reframe, just truth, raw, unfiltered. I lowered the paper slowly. I want to be very clear about something, I said, my voice steady again. This is not about a child. This is not about misunderstanding. I looked at Chloe. Directly. This is about what a child hears, when adults believe no one is listening. Chloe's composure didn't shatter, not outwardly, but I saw it. The tightening of her jaw, the stillness in her posture, the calculation. Always the calculation. She is 8 years old, I continued, and she is already learning to apologize, just in case. A woman near the front covered her mouth. Ryan looked at Emma. For the first time that night, really looked at her and Emma. She stood near the edge of the stage, her small hands clasped together, her eyes wide, not understanding everything but feeling it. Children always do. I didn't act right away, I said, because I needed to be sure. I needed to understand whether what I was seeing was part of something larger. I let that settle. Then I continued. So I asked for help. I glanced toward the back of the room. David Coleman stepped slightly forward, not dramatically, not drawing attention, just enough to be seen. My attorney reviewed my records, I said, my accounts, my documents, and he confirmed something important. I paused. Not for effect, for clarity. There had been multiple attempts to understand the structure of my estate, indirectly. A sharper ripple moved through the room now, because this was different. This was no longer emotional. This was factual, concrete. Questions about my home, I said, my savings, my long-term plans, framed as concern, presented as care. I let my gaze return to Chloe, but always, moving in the same direction. Chloe's voice came then, finally, tight controlled. This is inappropriate, she said. You're making assumptions. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't interrupt her harshly. I simply continued, and that's when I realized something else. Her words faded, not because she stopped speaking, but because the room stopped listening. Concern doesn't require secrecy, I said. Care doesn't require a narrative. And support doesn't begin with removing someone's voice. The words settled heavily. Chloe went still, because she understood now. This wasn't an emotional outburst. This wasn't something she could dismiss as sensitivity or confusion. This was structure, clarity, position. And so I said I made a decision. I straightened slightly, the microphone steady in my hand. I updated my estate. A pause. Subtle, but deliberate. I clarified my wishes. Another pause. And I ensured that no one could make decisions about my life, my home, or my finances without my explicit documented consent. The room was silent again. But this time, it wasn't tense. It was grounded. Because what I had just said couldn't be undone, couldn't be reframed, couldn't be argued away. I also made one more change, I added. I saw Ryan's head lift slightly, saw the flicker of something in his eyes. Hope, fear. I wasn't sure. I removed any assumptions, I said carefully, about future access. The meaning was clear, even if I didn't say it outright. Chloe's expression changed then. Not dramatically, but enough. Because for the first time, she wasn't calculating her next move. She was reacting, and reaction was not her strength. I didn't do this out of anger, I said. I did it out of clarity. I lowered the microphone slightly, letting the final words come more quietly, more personally. Because love, without respect, I glanced briefly at Ryan, isn't love, and family without honesty. I looked at Emma, isn't safe. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of understanding, full of realization, full of the kind of truth that doesn't shout, but changes everything. I stepped back slightly from the microphone, not retreating, just finishing. Because what needed to be said had been said. And for the first time that night, I wasn't standing in Chloe's story anymore. I was standing in my own. For a few seconds after I finished speaking, no one moved. It wasn't hesitation. It was impact. The kind that settles slowly, forcing people to reassess everything they thought they understood just moments before. Chloe was the first to break it. Of course she was. This is unbelievable, she said, her voice sharp but controlled, stepping forward just enough to reclaim attention. You're standing here in front of everyone twisting things to make yourself look like a victim. Her tone had shifted, not warm, not polished, but still careful, still trying to hold the line between composure and confrontation. I didn't respond immediately, because I had learned something important about Chloe. She relied on reaction, on pushing someone into emotion, on creating just enough chaos that clarity would dissolve. So I stayed still, calm, and I let her continue. This is exactly what I was talking about, she said, turning slightly toward the guests, as if appealing to them. This kind of behavior, this dramatization, it's exhausting. Exhausting. There it was again, the word from Emma's note, only now. Everyone could hear it. She takes things out of context, Chloe went on. She misinterprets normal conversations, normal concern, and turns it into something else entirely. A few guests shifted uncomfortably, not in agreement, in uncertainty. Because Chloe wasn't entirely wrong, at least not on the surface. That was always her strength. Enough truth to make the lie believable. I have never tried to control anything. She continued, her voice tightening slightly. I've only tried to help. Help. Care. Concern. The same framework. The same language. And for a moment I could feel the room waver. Not fully, but slightly. Because doubt is powerful. Chloe, I said quietly. She stopped. Not because I raised my voice, but because I used her name. Not as an accusation, as an anchor. I'm not questioning your words, I said. I'm describing their impact. That difference mattered, and people felt it. You can call something help, I continued gently, but if it results in someone being isolated, dismissed, or redefined without their consent, I let the sentence finish itself in their minds. Then we have to be honest about what it actually is. Chloe's expression hardened. That's your interpretation, she said quickly. No, another voice said, clear, steady, unexpected. We all turned. Lauren Pierce stepped forward from near the bar. She didn't rush, didn't hesitate. She simply walked into the space between us and stopped. That's not just her interpretation, Lauren said. Chloe's eyes widened just slightly. A crack. Lauren, Chloe said, her voice tightening further, this doesn't involve you. Lauren didn't look at her. She looked at me, then at the room, and then finally at Chloe. It actually does, she said calmly. The room shifted again. Attention tightening. Focus sharpening. Because this was new, unplanned, and Chloe knew it. You've done this before. Lauren said, not loudly but clearly. The words landed with precision. Chloe's composure flickered. That's not true, she said quickly. Lauren didn't raise her voice, didn't argue. She simply continued. You attach yourself to a family, she said. You build trust. You position yourself as supportive. Each word was measured, and then you begin to reshape things. Chloe shook her head, her smile returning but thinner now. This is ridiculous. Is it? Lauren asked. A pause. Then Charleston, she said. The word hung in the air, and just like that, something shifted. Because now this wasn't abstract. This wasn't interpretation. This was history. Chloe's silence lasted a fraction too long. I don't know what you think you're doing, she said, her tone colder now, less controlled. Lauren stepped closer, not aggressively, but firmly. I'm telling the truth, she said, and the truth, she added quietly, has a pattern. That word again, pattern, I saw it happen. Not all at once, but in waves. The room began to understand, not fully, but enough. Enough to connect what they had heard from me with what they were hearing now. Enough to see that this wasn't a single perspective. It was a structure, a repetition, a design. Ryan, Chloe said, suddenly turning toward him, her voice shifting again, softer, almost pleading. You know this isn't true. All eyes turned to him. And for the first time that night, Ryan looked completely unprepared, not for the situation, but for the truth. He glanced at Chloe, then at me, then at Emma. And something in his expression broke. Not dramatically, not visibly to everyone, but I saw it. Because I knew him. I had watched that face change since he was a child. And this was recognition. The slow, painful realization that something he had trusted wasn't what he thought it was. He started, then stopped. Because there was no easy answer, no quick defense, no simple way to reconcile everything he was seeing. Ryan, Chloe said again, more urgently now. He looked at her, really looked at her, not as his wife, not as his partner, but as someone he was trying to understand and failing. I didn't see it, he said finally. The words were quiet, but they carried. I thought, he began, then shook his head slightly. I thought you were just trying to help. Chloe's face tightened. I was, she insisted, but now, the words didn't land the same way, because the room had changed, the context had changed, and most importantly, Ryan had changed. He turned toward me, and for the first time in a long time, there was no distance in his eyes, only something raw, something real. I should have said something, he said. The words were simple, but they hit harder than anything else that night, because this was the part that mattered most. Not Chloe's manipulation, not the narrative, not even the plan, but his silence. I should have listened, he added. I didn't respond immediately, because forgiveness is not the same as understanding, and understanding, doesn't erase what's already been done. Emma began to cry. Softly at first, then harder. The sound cut through everything. Through the tension, through the conversation, through the carefully constructed layers of adult behavior, because children don't process truth the same way. They feel it, directly, honestly, without filters. Ryan moved toward her, immediately kneeling down. Hey, he said gently. It's okay. Emma shook her head, her small hands covering her face. No, it's not, she whispered. The words were barely audible, but they broke something open in the room. Because she was right. It wasn't okay. And it hadn't been for a long time. I stepped forward then. Not toward Chloe, not toward the crowd, toward Emma. I knelt beside her. Careful, slow, sweetheart, I said softly. She looked up at me, tears streaking her cheeks. I didn't mean to make everyone sad, she said. My heart tightened. Oh, Emma, I whispered, this isn't your fault. She sniffed, her voice small. I just wanted everyone to be happy. I reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. I know, I said, and that's a beautiful thing. I glanced briefly at Ryan, then back at her. But sometimes, telling the truth is what makes things better. Not immediately, not easily, but eventually. She nodded slightly, though I wasn't sure she fully understood. She didn't need to. Not yet. Because this moment wasn't about resolution. It was about revelation. And that had already happened. Chloe stood off to the side now. Still composed, still upright, but no longer in control, because the story she had built was no longer the only one being told. And once another truth enters the room, it becomes impossible to ignore. The party didn't end so much as it unraveled. No one announced it, no music stopped abruptly, no lights flickered, but the energy, the carefully constructed elegance of the evening collapsed in quiet, unmistakable ways. Conversations broke into hushed clusters. Glasses were set down, unfinished. People began to leave, not in a rush, but with a kind of deliberate politeness that made it clear they didn't want to stay in the middle of whatever this had become. I stepped off the stage slowly, my hands no longer holding the microphone, but still steady. For a moment, I didn't look at anyone. Not Chloe, not Ryan, not the guests, because I already knew what I would see. Instead, I walked toward the edge of the room where the windows overlooked the dark lawn lit softly by strings of lights that now felt more decorative than celebratory. I needed a moment, not to recover, but to transition, because something had shifted not just in the room, but in the structure of everything that came after. Behind me, I could hear voices rising and falling, fragments of conversation. I had no idea. She mentioned something to me last month. That note, that child. This is serious. The narrative Chloe had built was still there, but now it was being examined, questioned, reinterpreted, and that was something she couldn't control anymore. Mom, Ryan's voice, closer now. Careful. I turned slowly. He stood a few feet away, his shoulders slightly slumped, his expression stripped of everything I had seen earlier. Confidence, distance, distraction. All of it gone. What happened, he asked. The question wasn't defensive, it wasn't accusatory, it was lost. I studied him for a moment. This man in front of me, my son, the boy I had raised, and the man who had stood beside me earlier and said nothing. You were there, I said gently. You saw it. I saw tonight, he replied quickly. But before that, I didn't see it. I nodded slowly. I know. He ran a hand through his hair, his breath uneven. Why didn't you tell me, he asked. The question might have sounded reasonable to someone else, but to me, it carried something deeper. Would you have listened, I asked. He opened his mouth, then closed it, because he knew. We both did. I thought... He started, then paused, searching for words. I thought she was helping. There it was again, helping. I know you did, I said. I thought you were just... adjusting, he added. That things were changing and maybe you were having a hard time with it. I let that sit for a moment. Because it mattered. Not as an excuse, but as a truth. That's what you were told, I said. He looked at me. And this time, he didn't look away. I should have questioned it, he said quietly. Yes, I replied. The word wasn't harsh, but it wasn't softened either. Because accountability doesn't need to be loud to be real. I should have noticed Emma. he added, his voice breaking slightly. At that, something in me shifted. Because that was the part that mattered. I should have noticed how she was changing. Yes, I said again. He swallowed hard. I didn't want to believe something was wrong, he admitted. It was easier to think everything was fine. I nodded. That's how it works, I said. He frowned slightly. What do you mean? I looked back toward the room. Toward Chloe. She was speaking to someone near the bar, her posture still composed, her expression carefully controlled. But it was different now. Tighter. More calculated. She didn't need you to believe everything she said, I explained. She just needed you not to question it. Ryan's gaze followed mine. I don't understand how I missed it, he said. You didn't miss it, I replied. You ignored it. The words landed, and this time, he didn't argue. He just nodded, slowly, because recognition is rarely comfortable. Across the room, I saw David speaking quietly with two of Ryan's colleagues. Their expressions were serious, focused, professional. This was no longer just a family issue. It had crossed into something else, something that carried implications beyond emotion. Mr. Collins asked me a few questions, Ryan said, following my gaze. About what you said? I turned back to him. What did you tell him? Ryan hesitated. The truth, he said, finally, that I didn't know about any of it. And how did that feel, I asked. He let out a short, humorless breath. Not good. No, I said, it wouldn't. Because truth doesn't just expose others. It exposes you, your choices, your silence, your role in what was allowed to happen. I think they're concerned, he added. They should be, I replied. He looked at me surprised. You don't think this is too much? I met his gaze, do you? He hesitated, then shook his head, no. Because somewhere beneath the discomfort, beneath the consequences, beneath the unraveling of everything he thought was stable, he understood. This wasn't about embarrassment. It wasn't about a scene. It was about something that had been happening quietly for a long time and had finally been brought into the light. What happens now, he asked. I considered the question, not quickly, not reactively, but carefully. Now I said, you decide what you're willing to see. He frowned slightly. I already see it. Do you? I asked. The question wasn't a challenge, it was a test, because seeing something in a moment of crisis is not the same as accepting it afterward. He didn't answer right away, and that told me everything I needed to know. Behind us, the room continued to thin. Guests were leaving, quietly, respectfully, but decisively, because no matter how elegant the setting, no one wants to remain in the aftermath of truth. Diane approached, then her presence steady as always. Skylar, she said softly. I turned toward her. You okay? I nodded. I am. She glanced briefly at Ryan, then back at me. That was something she said. I almost smiled. Yes, I replied. It was. Ryan shifted, slightly uncomfortable. I didn't know he said to her. Diane held his gaze for a moment. I believe you, she said, then added gently but firmly. But you should have. Ryan looked down, again, because the truth doesn't soften just because it's spoken kindly. Across the room, Chloe finally looked toward us. Her eyes met mine, and for the first time since I had known her, there was no warmth there. No charm, no careful presentation. Just calculation. And something else. Something sharper, colder, not defeat. No. Chloe wasn't the kind of person who accepted defeat. This was something else. Adjustment. Because people like Chloe don't stop when something fails. They adapt. And that was when I understood something important. This wasn't over. Not completely, not yet. Because while the truth had been revealed, the consequences were only just beginning. The days after the party were quieter than I expected. Not peaceful, not resolved, just quieter. Like the moment after a storm passes when everything is still standing, but nothing feels quite the same. I woke up the next morning to sunlight spilling across my bedroom floor, the same as it had every other day for years. But I didn't feel the same. There was no heaviness in my chest, no lingering confusion, no second guessing, just clarity. And clarity, I was learning, comes with its own kind of weight. My phone rang around mid-morning. Ryan, I let it ring once, twice, then I answered. Hi, I said. There was a pause on the other end. Hi, Mom. His voice sounded different, not polished, not controlled, just tired. Can I come by? He asked. The question wasn't framed carefully. There was no explanation, no justification, just a request. I considered it for a moment, not because I didn't want to see him, but because I needed to be sure I was ready to see him clearly. "Yes," I said finally, "you can." He arrived about 20 minutes later. No suit, no professional composure, just Ryan. He stepped inside and looked around the house like he hadn't seen it in years, which in a way, he hadn't. "You kept everything the same," he said. "I didn't need to change it," I replied. He nodded slowly, taking that in. We sat at the kitchen table, the same one where he had done his homework as a child, where we had eaten countless meals, where we had once talked about everything. Now there was a space between us, not physical, emotional, earned. "I don't know where to start," he said. "That's all right," I replied. "Start with what's true." He let out a slow breath. "I messed up. Simple. Direct. No excuses." I appreciated that. "Yes," I said. He flinched slightly, not because I was harsh, because I didn't soften it. I thought I was protecting my family. He continued. "I thought I was keeping things stable. And what were you actually doing?" I asked. He swallowed. "I was ignoring what didn't fit," he said. "Yes." The word came easily now, because truth once accepted becomes easier to speak. I saw things he admitted, small things, comments, the way Emma reacted sometimes, and I told myself it wasn't a big deal. I nodded. "That's how it starts." He looked at me, his eyes searching. "Why didn't you fight harder?" he asked. The question surprised me, not because it was unfair, but because it revealed something important. "You wanted me to fight," I asked. "I wanted you to say something," he replied. "I did," I said gently. "When every time I stayed calm," I said, "every time I didn't argue, every time I stepped back instead of creating conflict." He frowned. "That doesn't feel like fighting." "No," I agreed, "it doesn't. Because it wasn't. It was me trying to preserve something," I continued. "The relationship, the family, you." His expression shifted. "But there's a point," I said, "where preserving something means losing yourself." He looked down at his hands. "I didn't see that, I know." Silence settled between us. Not uncomfortable, just honest. "What happens now?" he asked after a moment. The question again, but this time it felt different, more grounded, more real. "That depends on you," I said. He looked up. "On me, yes." I leaned forward slightly, my voice steady. "You have to decide what kind of man you want to be moving forward." He didn't speak, so I continued. "Not the man who avoids conflict," I said. "Not the man who believes what's easiest, but the man who sees clearly and acts accordingly." He absorbed that slowly. "And Chloe?" he asked. There it was. The part he wasn't ready to say out loud. What about her? I didn't answer immediately. "Because this wasn't my decision. Not anymore." "That's something you need to figure out," I said. He shook his head slightly. "She left," he said. I blinked. When last night he replied. After we got home, a strange stillness moved through me. Not surprise, not satisfaction, just confirmation. "What happened?" I asked. "We argued," he said, simply. Not like before, not controlled, not polite. He let out a short breath. I asked her directly about everything, about what you said, about the conversations, the patterns, and she denied some of it, he said, minimized the rest. That sounded familiar. But then, he paused. "What she blamed you," he said. "Of course she did. What did she say?" I asked. "That you were manipulative," he replied. "That you were trying to turn me against her. That you couldn't accept change." I nodded slowly. "And what did you say?" He met my eyes. "I told her I wasn't asking about you," he said. "I was asking about her. That mattered. More than anything else he had said so far. And then I asked. She got angry," he said, "really angry." He looked down briefly. I've never seen her like that. I didn't respond. Because I had, not outwardly, not openly, but I had seen the edges of it. The control, the calculation, and what happens when control slips. She packed a bag, he continued, said she needed space. "Do you believe that?" I asked. He hesitated. "No." "Then what do you believe?" He took a deep breath. I think she realized I wasn't going to ignore it anymore. Yes, that was it. That was the shift. Not the argument, not the accusations, but the loss of passive acceptance. "Where is she now?" I asked. "With a friend," he said. I nodded. "And Emma?" "She's with me," he said quickly. "At home." I felt something soften in my chest at that. "Is she okay?" He shook his head slightly. "She's confused," he said, upset. He looked at me again. "I don't know how to fix this." The honesty in that statement mattered, because it meant he understood something essential. This wasn't something that could be fixed quickly or easily. "You don't fix it," I said. He frowned. "Then what do I do?" "You rebuild it," I replied. With what I held his gaze. "With truth," I said. "With consistency. With actions that match your words." He nodded slowly. "And with Emma?" he asked. "With patience," I said, "and safety." The word lingered because that's what had been missing. Not love, not structure, safety. "I want you to see her," he said suddenly. "Now, yes." I hesitated, not because I didn't want to, but because I needed to be sure this was right. "For her," he added quietly. That decided it. "All right," I said. We stood. Not as we had before, not as mother and son caught in a pattern of avoidance, but as two people trying to do better, trying to see clearly, trying to rebuild something that had been damaged but not completely destroyed. As we walked toward the door, I glanced once more around my home. The same walls, the same furniture, the same life. But I was not the same woman who had sat at this table just days before, because I had done something I'd never done before. I had drawn a line. And now, everything on the other side of it would have to change. The first time I saw Emma after the party, she didn't run to me. She stood in the doorway of Ryan's house, her small hand gripping the edge of the frame, her eyes uncertain, not afraid, but unsure. That was harder to see, because fear can be comforted. Uncertainty has to be earned back. "Hi, sweetheart," I said softly. She looked up at Ryan, then back at me. "Hi, Grandma." Her voice was quieter than I remembered. "Careful." Ryan stepped back slightly, giving us space. Not forcing, not guiding, just allowing. That was new. I knelt down, slowly bringing myself to her level. "You don't have to come to me," I said gently. "I can come to you." She studied me for a moment, then took a small step forward, then another, and then she wrapped her arms around me. Not tightly like before, not with that unfiltered joy, but enough. Enough to tell me that something was still there. "I missed you," I whispered. "I missed you too," she said. We stayed like that for a moment. Then she pulled back, looking at my face as if trying to read something. "Are you mad?" she asked. The question was so simple, so direct, and so revealing. "No," I said softly. "I'm not mad. Not at me," she pressed. "Never at you," I said. Her shoulders relaxed just slightly. "Are you mad at Mommy?" she asked next. There it was. The part she couldn't understand, the part she was trying to make sense of. I didn't answer right away, because this mattered. Every word mattered. "I'm not mad," I said carefully, "but I don't think everything Mommy said or did was kind." Emma frowned slightly. "But Mommy says we have to be kind," she said. "I know," I replied, "and that's a good thing." "Then why?" She started, then stopped, unable to finish the question. I reached out gently, smoothing her hair back. Sometimes, I said, people say one thing and do another. She thought about that, processing, trying to fit it into the rules she had been given. Like when someone says sorry but doesn't mean it, she asked. I smiled softly. "Yes," I said, "like that." She nodded slowly. "That's confusing," she admitted. "It is," I agreed. We sat together on the living room floor after that. No schedule, no structure, just time. Emma brought out her drawings, her toys, her books, and slowly as the minutes passed, I saw something begin to return. Not all at once, not completely, but little by little. Her laughter came back, tentative at first, then freer. Her questions became less careful, her movements less controlled. Ryan watched from the kitchen, not hovering, not intervening, just observing, learning. That mattered more than anything he could have said. At one point, Emma looked up at me and smiled, a real smile, unfiltered, and in that moment, I felt something inside me settle. Not because everything was fixed, it wasn't, not even close, but because something important had been restored. Connection, real connection, the kind that doesn't rely on permission or approval or careful positioning, just presence. Later that afternoon, Ryan sat down across from me again. Emma was in the other room, drawing quietly. "She's different," he said. I nodded. "Yes." I didn't see it before he admitted. "I know." He looked toward the hallway where Emma sat. "I don't want her to feel like that again," he said. "Then don't let her," I replied. He frowned slightly. "It's not that simple. No, I said, it's not, because it wasn't, but that didn't make it unclear. You have to be consistent, I said. With what? With what you allow, I replied. He absorbed that. And with what you don't. He leaned back slightly, exhaling. I'm going to talk to someone, he said. A therapist, for Emma, and for me. I nodded. That's a good start. And Chloe, he asked again. The question felt different now. Less urgent, more reflective. I don't know yet, he admitted. But I know I can't go back to how things were. No, I said, you can't. Because once you see something clearly, you can't pretend you didn't. That's the cost of truth. But it's also the gift. Weeks passed, not dramatically, not with big sweeping changes, but with small, consistent ones. Ryan showed up, not perfectly, but honestly. Emma came to visit more often, not scheduled to the minute, not structured, just visits. We cooked together, played music, sat in silence when there was nothing to say, and Chloe remained absent. At first it felt like a gap, a missing piece, but over time, it felt like something else. Space, not empty, but open, and in that space, something healthier began to grow. One afternoon, as I sat at the piano in the community center guiding a group of older women through a simple song, I caught a glimpse of Emma in the doorway. Ryan stood behind her, watching, not interrupting, not directing, just present. Emma smiled when she saw me, and this time, she ran, straight into my arms, no hesitation, no checking, no apology, just joy. And as I held her, I realized something. That night at the party, the one that could have destroyed everything, had actually revealed everything. It hadn't broken my family. It had shown me what needed to change. It had shown Ryan what he needed to see. And most importantly, it had protected Emma from growing up believing that love meant shrinking, that being quiet was the same as being good, that someone else could define her worth. Because now, she had something else to learn, that truth matters, that kindness and respect are not optional, and that love, real love, doesn't ask you to disappear. As I sat back down at the piano, Emma beside me, her small fingers pressing uncertain notes into the keys, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Not the fragile kind that depends on everything going smoothly, but the steady kind that comes from knowing you didn't stay silent, you didn't disappear, you stood up, and in doing so, you made space for something better to grow. There's something we don't talk about enough, especially as women, especially as mothers, especially as we grow older. We are taught to keep the peace, to be patient, to understand, to forgive, and those things matter. They do. But what we're not always taught is where the line is. The line between patience and self-erasure, the line between understanding and allowing harm, the line between love and silence. Because silence over time becomes something else. It becomes permission for others to define you, to minimize you, to slowly rewrite your place in your own life. And the hardest truth? Sometimes the people we love are the ones who benefit from that silence. Not because they're cruel, but because it's easier. Easier not to question, easier not to see, easier not to disrupt what feels comfortable. But comfort is not the same as truth. And truth, when it finally comes out, doesn't always feel gentle. Sometimes it feels like loss, like conflict, like everything is falling apart, but often it's the beginning of something being put back together the right way, with clarity, with boundaries, with respect, and most importantly, with dignity. If you've ever felt pushed aside, overlooked, or made to feel like you had to shrink to keep the peace, I want you to know this. You are not too much. You are not the problem, and you do not have to disappear to be loved. I'd really love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever experienced something like this in your own family? What would you have done in my place? Tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. And if stories like this resonate with you, don't forget to like and subscribe. Because sometimes sharing these stories is how we remind each other we're not alone.